Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. Time for Spawn Daily. We're up to issue number 29. Apologies that Rocky can't join me. Again, he's having some family things that he needs to take care of. So I'll be running solo for Spawn Daily for today, as well as tomorrow. Hopefully Rocky will be back soon. Also, don't forget, we have our DC Spotlight that's out today as well, covering all the DC comics. I know there's some really important DC comics today. Again, running solo on it, which it does a couple things. At least it makes it go faster, right? Like those DC spotlights tend to be pretty long because Rocky and I are both, big DC fans, and we often have a lot to say. But I'm kind of disappointed. I have to admit, fully understand, hoping for the best for Rocky and his family as they deal with these issues. But man, I got to say, I'm always disappointed when I have to run solo on the DC Spotlight because I love hearing Rocky's comments on those DC books because, so often he has a different perspective than I do. And there's some important books, So again, go check that out if you feel like it. Meanwhile, I'm going to dive into Spawn number 29. Bit of a different feel for this one this time. Let me go ahead and share my screen so you guys can check it out. Interesting cover. You see Spawn there and the cape or the symbiote, whatever. It's really, as you can see, not the usual flowy type of cape that we see there. A lot of black as opposed to black and red. They're usually used to seeing Spawn, but it's almost like the symbiote costume or what have you is really worn out. So as you can see, Todd McFarlane does the story. It's Capullo and McFarlane with a special thanks to Kevin Conrad on art. And what I want to point out is it's been Capullo and McFarlane for a while on art, but Todd had been listed first. This is the first one where they're both there, where we see Capullo listed first. So don't know if that's because he's doing more of the heavy lifting or what exactly is going on there. Orzechowski does the letters as always. We have Steve Oliff on colors. So kind of interesting, right? We did last issue when we saw that Spawn had literally crucified Curse up in the alleys that he calls his own, his turf back in New York, as kind of a living warning sign for all the psychotics that have been coming after him. That's the way that he put it. And then we open up this book and there's a note right up there at the top. If you notice, it says this story begins where we left Spawn at the close of the Angela miniseries issue number 3. So, we've talked before about how we might get to the Violator series, we might get to the Angela series. Those were both early miniseries that tied into the Spawn lore. We also talked, Rocky and I, about a tie-in with Youngblood from Rob Liefeld and how Chapel got killed there and how we had a bit of a story jump. And we didn't really like it. A lot of it to do with, I don't want to have to go kind of hunt down Youngblood issues, sort of, because it was so sporadic. And if these are that important, then it should take place in the Spawn series itself. But I get it, right? Like McFarlane was only putting this out. If you wanted to do an Angela miniseries or whatnot, to get even more sales, I sort of understand it. But at the same time, it would have been nice if it was all just contained in one book. But I guess, I don't begrudge the fact that McFarlane's got, 4 books now. He's got Spawn, King Spawn, Gunslinger Spawn, and The Scorched, all set in the Spawn universe. So again, we talked about this before as well, with those crossovers, it almost felt like Todd was trying to start a Spawn universe, or a connected superhero universe anyway, way back then. So regardless, for whatever reason, we do start off here in, I don't even know if it says where we are. We're in Alabama, but I think it takes a while to actually say that. But Spawn, again, I haven't read the Angela miniseries, but Spawn is out in the rural areas, out in the boonies, I guess you'd say. Just pops up here and this kid's like, hey, you want to play ball with me? And Spawn's like, sorry, kid, not right now. He passes out. And this is actually a fantastic scene. Like, love it, right? We know, and we've talked a lot about how heavy Spawn is, the fact that he's made out of psychoplasm. And, here he just passes out and the kid's like, Andy Frank is his name. He's trying to pick him up and he's grunting, groaning. It's a great scene there with the art, the way it's drawn, with him gritting his teeth, and you see sweat standing out of his face. And we're told that there's no way Andy Frank is going to be able to lift over 400 pounds of psychoplasm, right? But give this kid credit for trying. But what's awesome is he ends up like actually picking him up like in a cradle carry because while he's straining, the chains that are alive that are a part of Spawn's costume are actually doing the lifting, which I just think is hilarious. That this kid thinks, I mean, even if he wasn't Spawn, right? Even if he was just a grown man, even a very thin grown man, this little kid, this 5, 6 year old, whatever he is not going to be able to lift a grown man, but give him credit for trying. And I love the fact that the chains come to the rescue and he sticks him in the wagon. Now we're told that the wagon has been tested for weight up to 450. I'm not really buying that. That seems like a stretch, but I'm going to forgive it because it's such a fun scene. And of course, when he pulls the wagon, he's not going to be able to pull it either. But again, the chains are pushing the wagon along, leaving cracks in the sidewalk. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great scene. You can see the silhouette there on top of the screen with the chains pushing behind, going chink, chink, and the wagon straighting. Again, I just, it kind of stretches believability to think a wagon would hold 450 pounds, but whatever, it would be the worse for the wear, I'm assuming. So anyway, Spawn's, he's kind of coming to here a little bit. He's still very, very weak, and he's asking the kid, you know, where are we going? And the kid's like, I got to go home. You know, if I'm late, my dad will get mad. He wouldn't understand. He never does. And when as he says that, Spawn starts to lose consciousness again. You know, the kid's pants are kind of drooping a little bit. And he notices that he's got some bruises and some scrapes and some welts and whatnot on his backside. But before Spawn can ask anything or focus on that, he loses consciousness again. So meanwhile, back in Queens, New York, we get a scene of Wanda and Terry in the bedroom. We find out that Wanda returned safely after her very ill-advised trip into the alleyways of New York searching for Spawn. It wasn't bad enough that she went there. She went at night. And it wasn't bad enough that she went there and she went at night. She went alone. And it wasn't bad enough that she went there, she went at night, and she went alone. She went wearing high heels. Right? It was completely ridiculous. So Terry, you almost think, and it, again, really greatly rendered facial expression by Todd McFarlane. The incredulity in his face right there tells you everything you need to know, but you almost think it needs to be even more exaggerated, right? That is definitely a Capullo face. I almost want it to be a McFarlane face because McFarlane tends to exaggerate expressions even more. So that might have been even better with McFarlane. Not that I begrudge Capullo's art at all. It's Capullo's art, and him and McFarlane both, whatever they're doing here, you know, again, they're collaborating on it. It's fantastic, but you know, he's like, what the heck were you thinking? You know, and Wanda, she does look admonished there. So hopefully she's learned her lesson. Next time she'll take someone along with her. So they're talking a little bit about it, trying to figure out what to do next when in comes their little girl Cyan and jumps in bed and interrupts their talk as little kids are prone to do. So a very realistic scene there. So Terry's happy to see her, picks her up, starts playing with her, and then we get the scene shift back to Alabama. We see that the little boy, Andy Frank, his father is actually a police officer. And he's mad because he comes home and he expected dinner to be on the table and it's not, and they're eating out every day. It's like, how do you think we can just eat out every day? You know, not made of money, and then I get home and I want a hot meal, not this garbage that you picked up. It's ice cold. And it's like, they're little kids, man. You're the adult. Why are they the ones responsible for putting dinner on the table? I mean, this guy clearly is kind of a jerk. And we also see in the foreground and the background, the place is a mess, right? So clearly there's not a mom around, and this dad is just out of control. And this little kid saying, yeah, I'll get you some better stuff to eat. He's like, yeah, you better, but first I'm going to make you eat this like a dog. I'm like, who does that to their kid? Like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? So the older brother, as older brothers often do, he tries to get his dad's attention. He's trying to take the beating for his younger brother, right? He's trying to protect him. But one smack, one backhand of the fist, and he's pretty much knocked unconscious. We do learn that his name is Eddie, and the dad turns his attention back to the smaller of the kids. And I'm not finished with your little brother yet. And yeah, it's not a pretty scene. Again, we've talked so many times in this Spawn series about how McFarlane doesn't pull any punches. This isn't lacking subtlety. I don't know that this this particular story would be told in such a way now. I mean, it's unfortunate that this kind of thing does still happen all too often, actually. Probably once a week, once every couple of weeks, we get a headline about some child being abused, and it's horrible. It's horrific. But we tend to be a little more sensitive about those kind of things. So I'm not sure. I mean, I don't begrudge McFarlane for putting this out there. At least it's starting the conversation. But I just wonder about kind of the overtness of it here. So anyway, the last scene on the page, we do get a little picture of the house, and it's kind of talking to us about the neighborhood. Florence, Alabama is where we are, and we're told that's an all too frequent activity that happens inside the house. And even though it gets noisy, everybody kind of pays attention to their own lives. You know, they're not too worried about what their neighbors doing, especially if it's a well-respected police officer that lives in this house. You know, who would suspect? So we see later that both the boys have some bruises. The younger boy, Andy's even missing a tooth, and it makes you feel really bad for these kids. So Andy tells his older brother, Eddie, hey, I got something to show you. Well, then they're kind of worried about their dad. Well, don't worry, he's usually passed out by this time. And sure enough, they peek into the living room. There he is, passed out in front of the TV with a couple of beer bottles next to him. So they head out to the shack in the backyard, and that's where he's got Spawn. And Andy's kind of talking to him like he's E.T. Hey, do you like Reese's Pieces? Does your finger glow? And Spawn's like, well, it used to, but I'm not sure if it still does. So obviously, whatever went down in that Angela miniseries in issue 3 really drained Spawn of power. He's so weak, and even his costume is weak. Like we saw on the cover, where it's not the full flowing cape. It's very much subdued. It's almost like it's trying to regenerate itself. So the older brother's like, well, where did he come from? Pa's gonna flip out if he finds out. And Spawn asks about the bruises because obviously he's suspicious, and they're like, oh, we just play a lot of tackle football. So it's clear that this dad terrorizes these kids and even has a built-in excuse for them to explain away the bruises if anybody asks, right? Because these kids must have bruises, all the time. So they've been sort of trained or indoctrinated to always say, hey, it's from playing tackle football or whatnot. So as they're talking to Spawn's trying to get answers. Their dad wakes up, he's calling for him, and so they go running inside. Again, they're worried about catching another beating, and he's yelling, "What are you, brain dead? It's past 10 o'clock. You need to be in bed early. We have church tomorrow." And meanwhile, Spawn is peeking out the window. He already has his suspicions, and the way the dad talks to the kids is only kind of confirming that. So we do get a little interlude. Now, we did have an interlude with Sam and Twitch last issue as well, where they discovered something in the file about Chief Banks that they were shocked by. We find out in this issue what it is apparently it looks like Chief Banks was the one who hired the killer who was responsible for killing the senator's child, that killer being Billy Kincaid. So Sam's like, man, no wonder Banks flipped out when Billy Kincaid was found dead in our office. He might have thought that Kincaid had confessed that Banks had something to do with the kidnapping and the killing of the senator's child. So yeah, it's pretty bad. This Chief Banks, we haven't met him yet, but he seems to be a pretty bad guy. So as Sam and Twitch are trying to figure out what to do with this, Sam says he's going to go grab a coffee. He walks out in the hall, and who does he run into but Chief Banks? And Banks is yelling at him, going, "What are you moving so slowly for? Don't you ever have a sense of urgency to fulfill your duties?" And Sam knows that he's got the goods on Chief Banks, right? So he kind of plays it up. He gets to be kind of smug and just, he knows that he's untouchable, that Banks can't do anything. So it's a very interesting dynamic, because I'm sure previous to this, Banks would yell and Sam would, hustle, and like Banks says jump and Sam says how high, because he kind of had him by the short hairs. But now it's not that way anymore. The dynamic has completely changed. And Banks even says, I know you and Twitch have been doing some stuff off the books, and that's not okay. If I catch you doing anything like that again, you're going to be suspended. And again, Sam can't help but poke the bear, right? Because he knows he's got something. He knows he's got something over the chief, and the chief's not even aware of it. He's like, yeah, it was rather unfortunate, internal affairs and the Billy Kincaid death. So yeah, I'll be more careful or whatever. And Banks is like, you're going to talk back to me? Don't turn your back on me. What's with the stupid grin on your face? And Sam just walks away saying, oh, you're going to find out, Chief. Bank on it. And he kind of laughs at his own pun. So meanwhile, back in Alabama, Spawn is continuing to recover. He watches these two boys and their dad go to church, which is, very two-faced. This guy's pretending to be a good Christian, and he's, beating the hell out of his kids at home all the time. So it's not so great, right? And even at church, some of the people ask, playing a lot of tackle football again, are we? So again, that indoctrinated line that the kids give. And we also learn through context and exposition that their mom has passed away, which you pretty much suspect at this point. So later in the day, Dad's sitting in front of the TV, drinking a bunch of beer as usual, tells the younger kid to go in and bring him his last beer and to be careful because it is his last beer. Don't spill any of it. And, he's a little kid, 5, 6 years old. So he drops it, it happens. And the dad, of course, freaks out because, that was his last beer. And he gets so mad that he actually pulls his gun out of his police belt. Like, oh my God, right? Like, this is your own son, man. What the hell is wrong with you? And of course, the younger brother comes in again and kicks the dad and tries to distract him, but there's no distracting him. And the dad actually pulls the trigger, but there was no bullet in the chamber. And the bullet just clicks, or the gun just clicks, and the dad walks away laughing. Just how awful, right? Like, nearly as bad as killing your kid. Like, you're psychologically torturing them, like scarring them for life. The dad thinks it's funny. He's actually laughing and tells him, go to bed. Think about what could happen next time I'm going out to the pub. Like, this guy's got no sense of responsibility for his kids. Like, one thing to not take care of them and provide for them in terms of food or care or love, but like to go beyond that, even to make things worse. It's one thing to be like not harming. Bad enough you're not taking care of them. Maybe if you're neutral, you're not harming them. But he's actively harming his kids physically and mentally. Again, it's just awful. No subtlety from McFarlane here. So the boys are crying and they're trying to figure out what to do. Like, he's getting worse. He was strangling me. I couldn't breathe. He wanted to kill me. And so they're trying to figure out what to do when Spawn comes walking in the door asking him what happened. And there's really no hiding it, even though the kids try to. They're like, nothing happened. And, he didn't do anything. And Spawn says, who didn't? Your dad? Where'd he go? And the boys, it's almost like Stockholm syndrome, right? Like, as horrible as it is, they feel some loyalty to this terrible human being, and they're yelling at Spawn, no, don't. And meanwhile, Wanda's doing the same. She's had a bad dream about Spawn, and she's wondering why she sees him everywhere, and she's kind of reliving the trauma that she experienced when Spawn beat up the guys in the alley. So Terry's trying to calm her down there, and again, it's all this foreshadowing for how they're going to react when they find out that Al Simmons and Spawn are one and the same. So meanwhile, Spawn's trying to comfort the boys back in Alabama, telling them everything's going to be better. He promises he's going to do the best he can. And so he heads out to the bar where their father is and waits for the dad to leave. And then when he does, he pulls him into an alley and he threatens them. It's like, I ought to knock your block off. And again, the thing that I have to wonder, I'm sure Rocky would say the same, like, you killed the child molester, right? Billy Kincaid, the child serial killer. In my mind, this guy's nearly as bad. And you haven't had qualms about killing before. And if anybody sort of deserves it, it would be this guy, or at least make sure that he can never hurt his kids again. But what Spawn actually does is just threatens him. Like, again, it's a pretty big threat. He uses a little bit of his power, and he says, this won't hurt, but I'm going to leave you something to remember me by, to make sure you get the message, and if you're good, it'll fade in a month. So meanwhile, when the kids come home the next day from school, they go running up to their room, and their dad is sitting there in their bunk beds, and we see that what Spawn did was he sort of tattooed him. I guess it's a temporary tattoo. It would fade away in a month, and it says, "I beat my kids," like all over his body. And we can tell the dad's been drinking as well. So, again, no subtlety, but I think Spawn kind of messed up here. Again, if anybody deserved to, and even if you're not going to kill the guy, like call the cops, do something, like remove these kids from this house. It's not enough. Like Spawn should have known better. Al Simmons should have known better. Maybe he had a great home life and so he doesn't have experience with this, but you got to know that this is just going to make it worse for these kids. So basically these kids are suffering the beating that is Spawn's, right? Like the dad couldn't attack Spawn. He doesn't have that power. Spawn would have just kicked the crap out of him. So this guy's anger at what Spawn did, Spawn doesn't pay the price for that anger. The kids do. And he goes for the little one first. And it's horrible. This older brother has to hear his younger brother calling for him, Eddie, Eddie, help me, help me. And he tries to get away. He can't, because he knows he can't help. He can't sit there and watch it. He's even covering his ears because he doesn't want to hear his brother's cries. And he goes downstairs. He's at the kitchen table. He sees the gun, right? And so he runs upstairs. There's the dad still beating on the kid. And he holds the gun out and he says, "Get off him now. I mean it." And his dad, not believing. "How many times have I told you that thing's not a toy?" And the older brother says, "I know." And then blam. So that's how it ends. We don't know. Did the dad wrestle the gun away from the older son? Did the older son actually get his revenge? Was this what Spawn maybe wanted all along? I tend to doubt that. It more seems like it's what McFarlane wanted in terms of the story. Justify, if there was ever a justifiable homicide, this is certainly it. But yeah, I just question the choice that Al Simmons made to just, let me humiliate this guy, right? Let me threaten him and then humiliate him by putting these temporary tattoos on him, and then let me send him back to his house with the kids that he abuses. Let me send the abuser back to live with the abused. It just seems like a bad choice all around. Like call the cops, call somebody, like knock the guy out, hang him from a tree, do something where authorities are going to show up and it's going to be obvious that this guy's been beating his kids. Instead of, you just think that I'm going to threaten him and he's going to listen to me. Or if this is what you choose to do, Al Simmons, then at least hang around and make sure that the guy's not going to take out his humiliation and anger for being confronted by you on the kids. So I really question Al Simmons' choice here. Now, again, Al doesn't have kids, maybe doesn't have experience with abuse, so cut up some slack. But just thought it was strange, the choice that Al Simmons made. But all in all, it's a powerful issue. It is a touchy subject. I'm glad that, in a way, that McFarlane did it, because it does start the conversation. It's a tough conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation. And like I said, unfortunately, that kind of abuse still goes on today. So interesting to go from what we've been doing in Spawn with all the different sort of storylines bouncing between the supernatural and the heaven and hell war, to the past of Al Simmons and how that ties into with what's been going on. And then in this one, 29, we almost get like a PSA, right? Like a public service announcement for, hey, let's not abuse kids. Like anybody needs to be told that. But unfortunately, there are those that do abuse kids, so maybe they do need to be told that. I don't know. But anyway, fantastic art, touchy subject. Interesting to see where we're going to go from here, too. Again, because I haven't been reading, we haven't read or touched on the Angela miniseries or the Violator miniseries. So how does Spawn get back to New York? Is he going to teleport back? Like, what exactly is going on here? What's the storyline? What's going to happen next? We had that Hunt storyline, the 4-issue that we covered, that was so much to do with the forces that were aligned against Spawn from his past, the mob, CIA, FBI, and the NYPD. And it felt like we were going to bounce back to the supernatural stuff, and maybe it did in the Angela miniseries, but again, we haven't read that. And so now we've been kind of in this no man's land where we're not really dealing with the past, although we do have Wanda and Terry sort of trying to figure out who Spawn is in a way, get more information about him, and exploring who was going after Terry, who was framing him. So it's a little bit of that past story. And we've had a little bit of the heaven and hell war with Curse, who felt like he should have been an agent of heaven. But we haven't really settled. And then when we get this issue, it's almost like, I've talked in the past when we did issue 25, that Mark Silvestri drew about how it had a villain that didn't even get named in that issue. And I talked about how it felt a little bit Smallville Freak of the Week. And this sort of feels like that too, like a one and done story. And again, there's nothing wrong with one and done stories, because this is certainly that, because the insinuation here is this horrible father got what he deserved by being shot and killed. So he's not a villain that you would expect to see again, and not really a match for Spawn anyway in that way. So not sure, almost like we're treading water a little bit, but we'll see where it goes next issue. So again, if you want to check out the video, I'm not sure when Rocky's going to be able to get these videos up on his YouTube channel, but there's plenty of other videos out there. If you haven't seen all the Spawn dailies, they're on there. Rocky's channel is Comic Boom on YouTube, so comic space boom ! If you don't already subscribe, please go and do so. Ring the notification bell so you know when new content comes out. Subscribe and like this video. All that stuff really helps out. Conversely, if you check us out on YouTube regularly, but you're not listening to the other Comic Source content that's audio only on the podcast, the way you can make sure you don't miss anything is go to your favorite podcasting platform or podcasting app on your smart device, do a search for the Comic Source, and subscribe. Whatever platform it is, Google, Stitcher, iTunes, we're on all of them. You can even ask your Alexa to play the Comic Source, and she'll play the most recent episode for you. So we're everywhere. And again, we appreciate the subscribers. We appreciate the support, because all of that helps us grow our reach, and it allows us to get more access to creators and content, and share all that with you guys. So again, really appreciate the support and for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.